talking about any aspect of it. I don't want to talk about masks anymore. I don't want to talk about shutdowns. I don't want to talk about anything. But here's the problem. It happened, and we're left with some of the results of it. And so we still got to talk about it a little bit. As a matter of fact, I was asked to teach a course at a biblical school. It's in Alabama, in Jasper, Alabama. And they'd asked me to teach one class, and I'd agreed to do that. It was a 12-week series. And then when their schedule came out, the topic they gave me was a 12-week series on revisiting the body of Christ, the church after COVID. And I was like, I got to do 12 lessons on the church after COVID. I'm sick of talking about COVID. I'm tired of talking about what we're going to be doing next. I'm tired of talking about the whole thing. But the reality is, we're stuck with some of the results from it. Matter of fact, last year I stood right here and preached a sermon. I preached several different places last year about the church is going to last. We're going to be fine. We were built to withstand this kind of thing. But one of the things that I mentioned, and I still have been watching pretty close, just like you have, is it seemed like that was going to be, during that time, it was going to be a time where we grabbed the tree and shook it real hard. And a lot of the fruit that wasn't held on real tight fell off. A lot of the stuff that was rotten, a lot of the stuff that already had bites in it. And here's the problem. A lot of that fruit still sitting on the ground. We're hanging on. We're at the end of the branches. Some of us were stuck to the tree a little tighter than others. Some of our members are still barely hanging on. But here's the problem. We got a bunch of them laying on the ground. And I think it's been real easy during this time to say, you know what? We respect them. We appreciate them. We hope they'll come back. And we're beginning to forget about it. Because a lot of congregations that I've spent some time with and talked to have said, you know what? We did really good during COVID. As a matter of fact, we gained families during COVID. You know why you gain families during COVID? In most situations, people took it as an opportunity to try into their congregation they've been planning on trying anyway. We really did grow. We just switched it around a little bit. And that's fine. You know, if you can be faithful, or your family can be stronger, or you can thrive in another congregation of the Lord's people that is strong, we're fine with that. We're fine with that. We're on the same team. We're pulling in the same direction. That's not a problem. But one of the things, my wife listened to a podcast not too long ago, and I thought she shared this with me, I thought it was the best illustration of what happened during all this. Before this whole pandemic thing, we had our plates full. And we had it stacked up. We had ball practice, we had stuff at school, we had all these things that were going on. We had worship services, we had youth group activities, we had we had prime time stuff, we had all this kind of stuff, and we were so busy. We were so busy. That's all you ever heard people complain about how busy they were. I'm just busy. I can't get all this done. I got so much to do. But here's the truth. We were getting it all done. And good, strong Christian people, and even folks who were just barely hanging on, they still had church on their plate. We wanted it to be at the center of the plate, but at least it was still on the plate. Well, during the shutdown, during the times that we didn't get to meet, during the times that you couldn't go to a restaurant, during the times they had to stop everything, people started taking stuff off their plate. They kept it on the table. It was still all right there. They took everything off, and some people for a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months, completely cleared their plate off. And all they did was stay home. They would order groceries online, or they'd do a call-in, and they'd go pick them up. Somebody put them in the trunk of their car with masks and gloves and a hazmat suit on, so they didn't make anybody, scared of them, and they'd drive home. We had members at Foot Street, where I am, who didn't do anything for between 9 months and a year. I didn't find that out till afterwards. Didn't do anything. They had family members drop the groceries by, but the family didn't want to go in and visit these older members because they didn't want to make them sick. And so here's what happened. As the veil dropped and life became normal again, people started putting things back on their plate. But here's the problem. we really got to see our priorities when we started putting stuff back on our plate. First thing we put back on our plate was church-related stuff, right? That's me and you. That's the first thing we put back on our plate. That's what's important to us. That wasn't the way all of our congregations saw that, right? That wasn't the way all of our brothers and sisters saw that. They started putting, the other things back on the plate. And what has happened over the course of a 2-year, 3-year period of time is we got a lot of our really, really good members who haven't put church back on their plate yet. They put everything else back on their plate. Their kids are back in school, they're going to the stores, they're going on vacations, they're doing all these kind of things, but they won't come back. And one of the things that has been a part of that is our online capabilities. We've got a lot of folks who've decided that watching church online is just fine. That's how they put it back on their plate. Or they decided that if we don't want to go today, this is still an option for us. During all this, we were having it to where you could come through at the church building. We only didn't have service for like maybe 6 weeks. We did it online. Then we started doing a high-risk service. We had a bunch of services during the day so that we could spread out. People could come on Sundays. Well, we'd say, okay, you can come by, and I want to see people. So I'd say, you come by the building, we'll have you some Lord's Supper stuff. Well, you can drop your contribution off. I'll stand over here, you roll your window down, we'll talk, we'll do all this kind of stuff. And I remember very distinctly one of our members coming through and going, I love this. And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, man, I love worshiping like this. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, I go in my office, and I pull this up on my computer, and I sit in my real comfortable chair. I drink my coffee. I still got my pajamas on. You know what he said? Almost like what we talked about last night. I just feel so much closer to God. And then he said, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say Hebrews 10. We're going to go to that in a minute. He goes, you're going to say Hebrews 10, but I don't think that means we have to be in person. Aren't we worshiping in spirit together? And I said, no, we're not. Not at all. Not at all are we worshiping in spirit together. Under the situation where we might have had to have done that, yes, but not now that we don't. But I think we've got a lot of people who really they didn't have to get the kids ready. They didn't have to like fight and argue to get their folks, their family to church. They just made it real easy. They could get up, everybody's sitting in their pajamas, and if they need to go to the bathroom, they went in the bathroom. They didn't have to get up and walk down the aisle where everybody saw them. They didn't have to beat their kids half to death when they got out there because they were screaming. They could just scream. They're in the living room, right? I mean, we got some really, really bad habits for some of our folks that we need to get back. And here's the truth of the matter. I understand evangelism. But we might need to adapt the way we look at evangelism or just a little bit. We might need to begin evangelizing our members. We need to start talking to as a matter of fact, they should be the easiest ones to evangelize. They already know the truth. We just got to motivate them to come back. But I know congregations that were 650 members, 700 members, 500 members. I've talked to 10 different congregations that were 550 plus member congregations before COVID that are 300 member congregations now. Lost a lot of people. It seems like the smaller congregations have better percentages. If you were a 350 member congregation or lower, the percentage of return has been much higher in our congregations. But here's what we're dealing with. We had a whole period of time where the all of America was basing all of their decisions, if not the whole world, making all of their decisions based on their own opinions. You and I knew the exact same stuff, right? It didn't really matter what you were watching. We were getting all the same information. We were just having to make our decisions based on the way we saw things. Some people said, we gotta have masks. Some people said, you're crazy if you think that mask worked. So why can I still smell through this mask? and it worked. And you got other people going, oh, but you gotta be safe. There were all these divisions. I know of congregations that literally split. Other congregations were formed because of these mask issues. So many people spend so much time making all their decisions, especially religious decisions, based on their own opinions. Well, then at the same time, there was a period of time where people weren't around very many other people for a while. And irritability was high. And the studies are now showing that one of the major results, especially in the religious world, from COVID is that people are having more conflict. They're having more conflict because they spend so much time concentrating on their own opinions and elevating their own opinions above everything else. Their fuses got a little quicker, and the things that they would overlook and wouldn't bother them before all this are now huge problems. They irritate them, they bother them, they get under their skin, they feel like they have to say something. And one of the things they're concerned about in the religious world, not just the church, but the religious world, is there's going to be a lot of confrontation over the next couple of years because we got so used to elevating our own opinion above everybody else and not taking other people into consideration. Congregations that were tight and close before are doing real well. But if there were a percentage of members who were already sort of on the fringe but still came, we're more likely to lose those in the next little bit than we were before all this, if they came back. So, we've got a lot to consider. So we talk about this idea between online and in-person worship. There's a couple things to consider. Is this on? Let me get this going. That's not it. I want to talk to you about some of the advantages. There was a lot of really good things that came from us worshiping online. Most congregations already had some sort of online worship, and it was for our shut-ins. It was for those who were sick. And it was a really, really good thing. So there are some advantages. First of all, during this pandemic, it was a big deal. For our sick folks, it was a big deal. For our shut-ins, it was a big deal. And we even had members who might be traveling somewhere and they didn't have a congregation in the area, especially they went up north somewhere where there weren't a lot of congregations in the area. They were able to worship online. Maybe not only with us, but with another congregation. And so there were some traveling times. And then one of the big advantages to having online worship is rewatching lessons. That's a huge advantage. You may have heard a sermon and your kids, we've got members that have 4 kids and they're great kids, but there's a lot of chaos going on that aisle. And they'll think that the family is as good as gold. I absolutely love them. And this is what they tell me. They go, you know what we do on Sunday nights after the kids go to bed? We get in bed and we turn your Sunday morning sermon on and we rewatch it. Because we wanted to hear what you had to say, but we also wanted everybody else to hear what you had to say, so we kept our kids quiet. So they'll rewatch it. That's a good thing. That's a positive thing. We put our sermons online, we put our worship service online, and they're archived. People can go back and hear them. Maybe you heard a sermon that your favorite preacher, or you wanted to hear their view on something, the way they dealt with something. You can go to their website. Huge advantage to having that online. Another advantage is sharing sermons. You know, during a lot of this, people would post the link to websites of their congregations. I'm not exactly sure how this all happened, but a lot of you know Alan Hires. He somehow keyed in on Foot Street, where I preached this during this past 3 years, and he and his wife worshiped with us online for like 2 years. Even if it wasn't at the worship time, they would go back and rewatch it. They would send contribution to us. They would do, and they would say, we heard this sermon and we shared it with somebody else. We had members who would say, wow, it's a great sermon. They would share that and put it on Facebook or put it on Twitter, or put the link somewhere for people to see, or they would email the link to somebody. So an advantage to having our online worship is there's a sermon that somebody you think might help them. You can take that link and you can send it to them. That's a great thing. That's a tremendous thing. That's a great, great blessing. Those words aren't lost. They aren't gone after you preach them. These sermons that people need to hear are helpful. They're able to share. Another one is, how many times have you been traveling somewhere and you were going to check out the congregation you were going to go attend, so you'd go to their website and pull up a couple sermons. I mean, that's what you want to do, right? We have people who come by and say, listen, I listened to 2 or 3 of your sermons we were going to be traveling through. That's why we decided to come here. Well, it's not because of my sermons, but it's because they didn't see anything that they were uncomfortable with. The song leader stood up, led a song. There weren't 15 of them, and there weren't any women leading singing, you know. And you took the Lord's Supper, and everything looked comfortable. It looked like I could go there. And so it gives us the opportunity to be familiar with other congregations, to be familiar with the places that we might want to attend if we're traveling through. That's a great thing. That's an excellent thing, because we get a chance to do a little research on where we might take our family. I remember before all this, it was a long time ago, it was before all the internet, people were putting stuff, we were visiting somewhere, and we found this church, and it said, so-and-so Church of Christ on it. That looks familiar, doesn't it? It said Church of Christ. I know what that means. I walked in that building and sat down, and I didn't recognize a thing going on in there. We got up left halfway through. I wish I could have gone and looked online and see what was going on there. I'd have never taken my family there. So this has been there's an advantage to that. You can do a little research. And then there's other congregations. We had entire congregations that did not have these capabilities that worship with us online for a while. I didn't realize it. We were having over 1,000 viewers at some points. And this congregation was doing, so many congregations had that capability. Other congregations were able to be a part of that. But you're also able to go online and hear people where they are and listen to their sermons and see how things are going and become familiar with other congregations. Not just for visiting, just for knowing other brothers and sisters in the church. So there's some huge advantages to having this online. But here's the truth of the matter. We've had some major disadvantages too. There are some really great things about it, but here's some of the negative things. First of all, this online has become an excuse for people. Well, we'll just watch it online. We're running late this morning. We'll just stay in the house. We'll watch it online. And because it's up there, we've even had people say, we'll watch it later. Now, I mentioned earlier that Alan Hires doing that, but he was worshiping at his congregation and then worshiping with us later is what he said. But we have folks who are just skipping and then worshiping later. Well, I mean, I don't know that that's great. I don't know if that's awful. I just think that's a disadvantage. I think it's good that we all do this together. And I understand that God can take their worship. There might be some extreme situations. But if you just don't want to get up and go to church and you're going to watch it later, that's a huge disadvantage. That's a disadvantage for our families. Another disadvantage is I think people have just become too comfortable with it. I think it's made people too comfortable with missing services. I think it's made it too comfortable for them to not have to. There's something about a Christian taking an initiative to be a Christian. There's something about, I used to always tell teenagers that I don't expect you to be at everything we have. I understand you have a life. You have things that are going on. I understand the things that we're doing with our youth program are things that are optional for you. But this is what I always said. You need to choose a spiritual activity over an extracurricular activity at least once a year. You got a ball tournament on the exact same weekend as our retreat. You don't have to come to the retreat. Don't miss worship. You don't have to come to the retreat. But it's good for you, not your parents, it's good for you to say, I'm going to go to retreat and not go to the ball game. It's good for you to do that because you are prioritizing something spiritual in your life. Well, I think what this has done is it's made folks so comfortable with missing that it's become easier for them to miss. We can just watch online. We're running late today, or I feel sick. I'm not going to go. We'll just watch online now. I think another disadvantage is I've already kind of been dancing around it. I think it's allowed people the opportunity to watch worship and not worship. Worship's not a spectator sport. I don't get to sit around and watch you worship. I understand that happened with Paul and Silas. You know, they were singing hymns and the other ones were listening, but that's not the norm. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. And I think for some of our members, the ones who aren't here, the ones who haven't come back, I think they got so comfortable with watching worship that worship wasn't important to them anymore. That they became so familiar, so comfortable with watching worship that they forgot what worship was really about and what coming together was really about. I think that's a disadvantage. I think one of our disadvantages is we've had folks who went for a while and have not come back. They have no fellowship. They're not around any Christians. And they've got comfortable with not being around Christians. You know, there was a study that came out several years ago that said if a person or family misses church services for 3 Sundays in a row, then they perceive that their life is better. 3 Sundays in a row, and here's why. Number 1, for 3 weeks in a row, they got 1 extra day of sleep. They slept in longer. So, on Monday, they were more rested for 3 weeks in a row. Number 2, they spent that time with their family, and so their weekends seemed longer, and they felt like things were better with their family than they'd ever been because they got to spend a whole extra day for 3 weeks in a row with them. And the third thing was really interesting. In 3 weeks, probably the biggest one, in 3 weeks, they had more money in their banking account because they had not given for 3 weeks. So 3 weeks of a family missing church actually makes them feel better as a family. I think Satan might be in that statistic. Satan might be in that study right there. Making folks feel like things are going better when they miss worship. Well, that's another thing. A disadvantage to online services is no fellowship, but also you're not giving. People haven't been giving because of that. And they haven't been taking the Lord's Supper. They haven't been worshiping. You can kind of see where I'm going with that. The idea that there's just been so many things they've missed out on, but they don't feel like they're missing out on. Another huge disadvantage is just, and this is something we've seen quite a bit, is there's been a diminished respect for attendance with God's people. Here's what I mean by that. Because we spent some time not coming, or because it was available to go online that was completely accepted, people have decided that that's completely acceptable now, and so they'll go to services, but on Sunday nights they may not because, we went for a while without doing it, so it can't be that important. Now, you and I wouldn't see it that way. You and I don't see it that way at all, but the truth of the matter is some of our folks who were barely hanging on are seeing it as, attendance isn't that important. Just like my buddy who came by and said, man, I'm loving this. I think this is awesome. I think this is great. No, this is awful. This is terrible. We all need to be in the same room doing the same stuff together. We need each other. We need to be around each other. But I think what it's done is it's made it easier for people to say, we're just not going to go. And it's easier for people to say, I don't feel great today. I don't want to make anybody sick. So I'm just not going to go. I respect that on one level, but at the same time, I think that's become an excuse for some folks. And I think one of the disadvantages has been religion. Our Christianity has become very closely related with our own desires, not the desires of God. I think this has allowed for people to elevate, like we mentioned, their own opinions. And the problem is some of these folks have elevated their own opinions above the commands of God. I don't think we have to. I don't guess it's that big of a deal. Yes, it is. I want everybody to go to Hebrews chapter 10. You knew we were going there. We've got to go there. But you got to look at the context and see what's going on in this passage. Hebrews chapter 10 is a life-changing chapter. As a matter of fact, this chapter probably helped me more than any other chapter in the Bible, if I'm being real honest with you. When I was in college, I heard a lot about Jesus. I've read the Gospels. I know a lot about Jesus. I know all about his birth. I know a lot of facts about his birth. I know a lot about, I know as much as I can know about him growing up. You know, I know about his miracles. I know about the parables. And so when I was a youth minister for a long time, whenever the preacher would stand up and say, turn to Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, I just kind of go, well, I've probably heard this sermon before. I know a lot about Jesus. And I'd kind of tune out because I've heard all these stories. I've heard all these sermons. I've heard all these things on Jesus. And one day I was asked to teach a class on the book of Hebrews. When I got to Hebrews chapter 10, I fell in love with Jesus. Hebrews chapter 10 is a game changer when it comes to that. But it's really the first part of that chapter that's so strong. But he concludes whatever this chapter and this discussion is with talking about the let us. You know, there's 8 let us passages in the book of Hebrews, and several of them are clumped together right here. And so he says in verse 19, he says, therefore, brethren, having boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way which he consecrated for us through the veil that is his flesh, and having a high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works. And then he says, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together. That's the part that we like. That's the part of that passage we like, because that's black and white. Don't miss church. You got to come to church. It says, don't forsake the assembly. We are the assembly. Don't forsake means don't not come. Be there. We like that. We can preach that. But it's the verse before it that is the important part, really. He says, let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works. If you study this passage very much, you know that the word stir is actually a culinary term. It's the idea of you have a bowl and you put all the ingredients in and you stir those ingredients up. I don't know how you make a cake. I really like to eat cake, but I don't know really how you make a cake. But I know it involves a bowl and a bunch of stuff you put in it that I don't like by themselves. But when you put those things in, mix it up, it makes something really good. I think the idea, and here what I want to do for the last part of this lesson is convey what we're going to have to do and how we're going to have to adapt our communication and the way we see these folks in order to get them back. If they've elevated their opinions above ours, if they've elevated their opinions above God's, if they've gotten to the point where they've decided that they don't have to come to church, us standing up saying, don't forsake the assembly, is not going to bring them back. They're not coming back with that. They're just going to say, well, that proves my point right there. We're going to have to adapt just a little bit and say, but we're going to have to view it the way this passage actually presents it. Not as a don't miss church, but as a there's advantages and there's something good for you to be with us. We have to be the kind of people that they're glad they're around. Now you take your bowl and you bring your good ingredients. You had a great week, you bring your good week. You got your talents and your strengths and your abilities, you bring those. You're a great song leader, you're a great Bible class teacher, you're a friendly person, you can remember what people were talking to you about last week. I'm terrible about that. I envy so much those people who can talk to somebody and remember all the things they talked about and 3 weeks later ask them about it. I'm like you, I talk to a lot of people and I get them all confused and I sometimes forget. But there are those of you who are tremendous conversationalists because you can remember things. You make people feel special because you can remember those things. You bring that, you put it in our bowl. But maybe you had a terrible week. You bring that and you put it in our bowl too. I don't like to drink oil by itself, but apparently it does something really good for a cake. I have eaten eggs raw for the sake of health and muscle growth, but I do not like doing that. You bring your weaknesses. That's what this passage is saying. You bring your good things, you bring the great things that are going on with you. We'll rejoice with those who rejoice, but you've had a terrible week, you bring that too. We're going to weep with you. You bring all the things that you have, you just show up and jump the bowl with us. You just show up and you get in that bowl and we're going to stir it together. That's the culinary term here. We're going to mix this together and the outcome is always good. The outcome is something that's better than the parts that were brought. That's the idea of coming together. Do you know, truthfully, every single thing that we do on Sunday morning in worship, we could do at home, and we've proven it. We could do it all by ourselves. We can sing a song. Look, I don't need you to sing a song. You definitely don't need me to sing a song. I'm the worst songwriter on the planet. You can sing a song by yourself. You can say a prayer. You can take the Lord's Supper by yourself. You can listen to a sermon online, or you can study the Bible for yourself, and you can drop your contribution off either through an app or on the way to lunch. Everything that we do, and you can cut the announcements out completely. As soon as they come on, you can just turn them off. That's my least. I can't wait for heaven because there won't be announcements, you know? Like, I have to do announcements at church. I hate it. It's my least favorite thing on the planet. I think I would rather lead singing than give an announcement. You don't even have to deal with those. Now, I'm acting worship anyway. You just turn it off. Every single thing that we do when we come together, we can do by ourselves. But God says, I want you to bring yourself. Now, I don't have to convince you of that. I'm trying to remind you of that. Because I think our approach, in order to get these folks back, has to be a whole lot less pulpit banging and a whole lot more respect and consideration. A very overlooked book is the book of Philemon. Philemon is just a little short book, stuck kind of towards the end. You read it, you go through it, and everything's fine. One of my, I guess, if you had to pin me down on what's your favorite verse of the Bible, I guess my favorite verse of the Bible comes from the book of Philemon. It's verse 21, where he says, I have confidence in your obedience. I think if I could have God say anything about me, it would be I have confidence in your obedience. Because that means that He's given me things I had to deal with, and I dealt with them correctly, and He trusts me enough to give me more. That's probably my favorite passage. That's what I want to live up to more than anything. But in the book of Philemon, you have a situation where you have a slave. Now, it's a different scenario than the history of our country. Most of the slave situations there was a binding, legal agreement. I don't have any money. I have a family. You have work that needs to be done. I will enter into a legal contract with you. You will house me, you will feed me, and I will help you run this. And the legal contract is usually what's being talked about when it talks about slavery in the New Testament. So you had this man named Onesimus who had entered into a legal agreement to be protected and fed and taken care of by this landowner, but his legal obligation was to fulfill his part of the situation, and that was to provide the labor to do the work, to do the job. Well, this man left. He left and he broke the agreement, and somehow he comes into contact with Paul. And Paul says, we didn't talk about Jesus. I don't know how that conversation came up, but he converted this man. And apparently, I think one of the main reasons this book is here is to point out what repentance really means. Because he says, apparently in this conversation, he said, you can't become a member of the Lord's church and not fulfill your obligations. You've got to go back and fix this. Well, that man's not going to take me back. He's going to get mad. He can throw me in jail. I just happen to know that guy. I'm going to write him a letter. He writes the book of Philemon. And he says, Philemon, you're a good man. You remember me, we're close. Now, Paul mentions in here, I'm an apostle and I could make you do something. I'm an apostle and I have authority and I could really come down hard on you. But the approach that Paul takes to Philemon is the one that we're going to have to adopt right now. We're going to have to adopt this philosophy and this approach. Because the approach that we want to do is get your rear end back to church. You're going to go to hell if you don't go to church. Don't you know we got to worship? You're doing it. You know better than this. We want to just be black because you know what? We raised our opinions above other people's too. It wasn't just them. Our fuses aren't as long as they used to be either. We're trying though. It affected all of us. And we want to say, get back to church. And we want to guilt them and shame them. We want to see them and go, oh, guess who finally showed up? Oh yeah. They're going to show up and we show them a baby shower, throw them a baby shower, sure. Oh, they ain't been to church in a long time, and all of a sudden they're wanting a wedding shower, so they're showing back up. And that's our attitude right now. I'm going to tell you something. That's wrong. We need to adopt the Paul to Philemon approach here for just a little while. And that is this. Verse 6 of the only chapter of the book of Philemon says, "Therefore, though I might be very bold in Christ to command you what is fitting, yet for love's sake I rather appeal to you." That's going to have to be our approach right now. For those folks that we're trying to get back, it's going to have to be an appeal. It's going to have to be not, hey, you know you're wrong. You know you've got to get back. You know better. Your grandparents would be so mad at you. Your parents would be so upset with you. And then guilt them when they're finally, we have to get rid of that for just a little bit. And because of what has come out of all of this, for some of our members, not all of them, but some of them, we're going to need to take this respect approach. I know you know what's right, and we miss you. I know that you've had a reason not to be here. Can you help me understand what those reasons are? We're going to have to appeal rather than be bold and command. Bold and command is our first, it's our nature. We want to draw a line and say, this is right and this is wrong, and that is correct. That's the way it is. But we're going to have to adapt this Philemon approach, and we're going to have to say, I want to appeal to you. And here's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to be ready for him to come back, because there's been a lot that's happened that we don't know about. Do you know that among teenagers alone, in the year 2021, mental illness rose by 30% from the previous year? That affects our families. That means that we've got folks who haven't come back, and it might be because their kids are going through things, and it's causing a lot of problems at home, and we don't know that. We don't know that. What about the grieving folks? You know, there are a lot of people who felt completely left out during this whole pandemic-y thing. How many of our members lost their spouses and weren't able to have a funeral? Let me tell you something. We've got members who are still grieving because they didn't get to have closure. We had 4 of our predominant members pass away, not by COVID. Just pass away from natural causes, and we were unable to have a funeral for them. And I think some of those people felt left out. I think they felt discouraged. I think they don't know they feel this way, but deep down inside they feel abandoned by the church. It wasn't their fault. We'd have had a funeral, would have had food out there to them, would have done all kinds of stuff, but at the time, we just couldn't. And they didn't even want it, and there was all these things going on. There's so many things that are going on that are different than it was 3 years ago, different than it was 4 years ago. Things changed for families. They didn't get to go on vacations. Do you know the teenagers that say their problems in their homes are like significantly higher than it was before all this, because they spent so much time together, not going on vacation, not getting out of the house, not going and doing stuff, not going out to eat, not spending time with their friends, that they fussed at each other all the time. They were arguing and fighting, and parents got upset with each other, and parents got upset with kids, and kids are feeling depressed because they didn't get to go on the school field trip. They didn't get to do what their older brothers and sisters did. They didn't get to do what the other ones are getting to do now, and they're feeling it. And those are echoing through our families. So it might not be that they're just not coming back to church. We're going to have to approach this from we want to appeal to you, but we're going to have to be ready for it and meet needs. We identified very quickly at Foot Street that we had some widows who weren't getting out of the house at all, scared to death to go anywhere, even still. Minimalization. I'm talking about show up to church, go home. Pick up groceries, go home. I think one of my favorite things we do right now is what we call widow's lunch. I asked them, you want this? What are you going to call this? I was like, I don't think you want to be reminded that you're a widow. Could we call it something else? And one of them just said, I am a widow. I'm a widow every morning when I wake up, and every day that I eat by myself, I'm a widow. You calling it a widow's lunch ain't going to remind me of it. I'm reminded of it every day. And we have a group of women that come up to a building that's not been used near as much in the last couple of years as it was for the years before that. And they put tablecloths, and they clip fresh flowers from their gardens. And they bring potluck food, and me and my wife get to sit and listen to them laugh and cut up and tease and talk about things and reminisce. And those folks are thriving right now because we recognized the need and said, hey, we want you back here. We need to up our activity. We've got to start. Yes, we want them in this worship. Yes, we want them in here. Yes, this is important, but we're going to have to start meeting needs. Maybe we need a grief class. We did it. Maybe you need a grief class. When was the last time you offered a grief class? People may not have mourned the loss of a loved one, but they may be mourning the loss of 3 years of their lives in their 80s. This isn't how they planned on living the rest of their lives. They didn't plan on living scared to death to breathe. They never dreamed that they would be scared to come to church. When was the last time we offered a grief class for them? Maybe if we say, hey, we're having a grief class for you, we might have some of them come back and we get our energy back. What about our families with younger kids? We're still recouping from that. There was a period of time where we were abbreviating our services, right? Sermons weren't as long. We needed to abbreviate because we weren't trying to be around as much, but we wanted to be here together. We cut out passing trays that cut the church time down. You know, we were doing things that we could do to kind of streamline things, to get out in 30 to 45 minutes. And that's what we were telling people because we were trying to communicate, this is a safe place for you to be. We want you to feel safe here. Well, we had families with younger kids whose attention spans got shorter. And what I noticed, I don't know how you are, but what I noticed was I was fighting more crying babies because we had to close our nurseries, right? We don't want to send them in there. Might get COVID in there. We had to close our nurseries down. We had more crying babies in the auditorium, and it was more frustrating to the rest of the members than I've ever seen in my life. Because they were trying to get back to church, but their kids had kind of lost that consistency of being there. Because maybe they didn't come for a while on Sunday nights. Have we thought about bringing our kids down front on a Sunday night? All of our 5th and under. I do this about once every month or two. And having a 10-minute sermon just for them. Bringing them down and reconnecting with our younger ones so that it helps those parents on Sunday mornings. It helps them be motivated to bring their kids on Sunday morning because those kids have a connection with the preacher or a connection with somebody else. I'll bring mine down and I'll sit them down here and I'll go, did you see that person be baptized the other day? What were you thinking? Did you think about that? Have you ever wondered about baptism? Let me tell you exactly what God wants you to know about baptism. And I talked to them about baptism. I talked to them about what they're supposed to do during worship and what God wants them to do. And our parents are just sitting there getting a break for just a minute. And they're saying, I'm glad somebody other than me just told my kid that. We're going to have to start thinking outside the box a little bit in order to provide an atmosphere so that when our folks who fell off the tree start climbing back up, they got something to hang on to. I refuse to think this is a time we're just going to lose a bunch of our members. I absolutely refuse to think this is going to time that we're just never going to see them back again. That's not how Jesus thought. That's not how we're supposed to think. So we're going to have to step back a little bit and figure out what these folks need and reach out to them. Because while there have been great advantages to this online thing, there have been some extreme disadvantages and we've lost some brothers and sisters. And that's not just a preacher thing, that's not just an elder thing, that's a church atmosphere thing. That is when you finally bring them back and those kids are screaming, nobody makes them feel guilty about it. Because if it is that they haven't been to church in a year and they finally do show up and their kids are screaming, this ought to be the place they can scream. This right here ought to be the place that everybody in this room says, you let that kid scream as loud as you want to. If I'm a strong Christian, it's not going to stop me from worshiping. As a matter of fact, that's a rabbit I'd like to chase for just a second. I think a lot of times strong Christians let weaker Christians stop them from being who they're supposed to be. Well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Somebody across the aisle from you, or across the, on the other side of the building from you, stop you from worshiping. What'd you show up for? If you can't get through a baby crying, then what makes you think you're going to enjoy heaven? I think sometimes our attitude has been a little more haughty. We got to get rid of that stuff. We've got to provide the atmosphere that if they finally do come back, we're so glad that they're here and cannot wait to see them back again. And if that means that they're not dressed the way we want them to dress, or if that means that their attitudes are the way it used to be, or if that means they're a little more irritable than they were, or if that means their babies are crying, or whatever, that's fine. You're not going to change me. I'm a strong Christian. I want to do everything I can to help you. There's a lot to this, a lot more we can go into. But I think the bottom line, the main takeaway here is what Paul said. I could tell you what you have to do. But because of love's sake, I'd much rather appeal to you and let you make the right decision. We're going to leave a lot of fruit on the ground if we're standing up there in the tree pointing fingers down at them. I don't think we should get down out of the tree and start grabbing them and bring them back up. I just think the tree ought to be a place that they're welcome when they decide to come back. But we've got to do everything we can to communicate that. We're trying to meet their needs, that we care about them, that we understand, even though we may not completely. Would you bow with me?